Not great. Welcome to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online at number 38. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm here after a tough moment, an unfortunate moment for the Denver Nuggets as they lose and are eliminated from the playoffs. Final score 98-90. Not fantastic, as I mentioned. Understatement of the year for many, obviously. And I know that this is a really, really tough moment for a lot of people that had high expectations for this team. I had high expectations for this team. This was a failure. Straight up. This was a failure of a moment. And the Nuggets are in a really, really interesting place now that they have to sort of go back to the drawing board in a situation where they, like, I wrote about it in the post-game article. I don't think they really ever thought that they were going to lose. Once they came back from 0-2 and went up 3-2, I think that they believed that they had it in the bag, and ultimately that didn't come to pass. We're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about everything that happened. This is going to be a shorter podcast. Obviously, it's 12:42. I'm tired. I've actually been up since about 5 o'clock in the morning, I want to say. And I'm just sort of running on fumes at this point. So I'm going to do my best to give you the best coverage possible. Just finished posting the post-game article over at Mile High Sports. So if you're interested in reading something tangible, make sure to go check that out. But now we're going to talk about Game 7. We're going to talk about what happened. First segment, we'll talk about Game 7. Second segment, we'll talk about how Denver kind of lost this series. And then third segment, we're going to talk about what's next, what happens now that Denver's eliminated, and now that the offseason is here quite suddenly for the Denver Nuggets. Matt is here in the comments saying, I am only here for the Justin Holiday praise. That is funny. Welcome back. Welcome by. Matt and I are going to podcast at some point over the course of this coming week. I'll say we'll definitely have to link up. Maybe we'll do a Denvengers or something like that. That'll be interesting. But hey, just want to let everybody know that Justin Holiday, unbeknownst to nobody, was a team high plus 10 in a game that the Nuggets lost by 8. 9 minutes, didn't take a shot. The only stats that he accrued were 1 steal and two personal fouls. So good on Justin Holiday for making a difference out there. I jest a little bit. Look, this is brutal. This is a brutal moment, and the Nuggets had it in the bag. They're up 20. I actually turned to Matt when Jamal Murray hit the 3 out of halftime and put Denver up 20, just a minute or so into the second half. And we both thought that the game was over. We did. This felt like a moment where Denver was going to capitalize, where they were going to maybe even pull away. And the T-Wolves fought back. And the one thing that really hurt Denver in this one was they stopped scoring. They just couldn't score. I went back and looked at the game logs. For a 6-minute stretch from the 10:50 mark to the 4:50 mark, the Nuggets scored 1 point. 1 point. It was a Nikola Jokic free throw. He missed the other one, by the way. And during that stretch, the Nuggets were hunting threes. It felt like during that stretch, the Nuggets were going for the haymaker. They were going for the kill. They were trying to get the T-Wolves to quit. And it didn't work because the Nuggets missed everything. They missed every single thing. And throughout this series, Denver's shot making just wasn't good enough. I'll talk about that more in the second segment, but tonight specifically, 8 of 33 from 3. Denver, outside of Jamal Murray, was 4 of 22. Jokic himself was 2 of 10, and he was 2 of 8 in the second half alone. Jokic was one of the problems tonight from the shooting standpoint. He shot 11 of 18 from 2. He had 3 turnovers, but much of those were just born from being aggressive on the inside. But he was 2 of 10 from 3, and for whatever reason, he consistently was hunting the outside shot, and it was a very bizarre thing. Just watching him sort of go into a mode where he wasn't, like, ready to go. He just wasn't fully locked in and ready to go downhill and doing the thing that had gotten them into that position in the first place. And it was funny because every single time that he went into the paint, he was good. He was very good. But he didn't get there often enough. I think he was exhausted. He played 23 of the first 24 minutes, 35 of the first 36 minutes, and ultimately played 47. I don't think he came out in the second half. And it just was clear that the Nuggets, Jamal Murray, everybody on the team just sort of ran out of steam. The T-Wolves have that effect on teams. They're a great second half team, specifically a great third quarter team. And they do a great job of forcing teams to question what they're doing. And that's what great defense does. Because here's the thing, the secret about Denver. They're okay if another team is scoring on them consistently. As long as Denver is still scoring, the Nuggets are fine mentally. Like, they know that once they lock in defensively, they can win a game like that. Where the Nuggets get all out of whack is when they can't score. Because as a team that has been predicated and built on their offense for as much as they have, they get very frustrated when they can't score. And that has been prevalent throughout this entire series. Game 1, there were moments. Game 2, it was defined by that. Game 6, they scored 70 points. And Game 7, they scored 90, despite the fact that they had 58 points in the first 25 minutes of the game. They scored 32 points in the final 23 minutes of the game. It's not good enough. And a lot of players can take the blame of that. Jamal Murray noted post-game that nobody shot above 50%. Aaron Gordon was at 40%. Michael Porter's at 25%. Jokic and Murray were the closest. They were just basically right under 50%. KCP was 2 of 7. Reggie Jackson 0 of 1. Christian Brown 1 of 3. Nobody shot well. Jokic and Murray shot a lot, and they had some good moments. Murray especially was great in the first half. Frankly, he carried Denver in a lot of ways. 24 of Murray's 35 points were in the first half, and he looked like he was going to carry the Nuggets through. He even scored the first 5 points of the third quarter for Denver, so he had 29 by the first 25 minutes of the game. It was great. He was really, really good. And Matt and I were turning and looking at each other like, how the hell is this happening? What is going on? Because Murray had been so bad for much of the series. But hey, he's a gamer. He steps up in these moments. But then when he started slowing down in that second half, nobody else really picked him up. Porter, MIA, for much of this series, let alone Game 7. Jokic, he was good, but not great. And Denver needed him to be great in this moment. I think that I've seen what Joker looks like when he looks great. And there were a couple of moments where he made the right decision, but often his process was not very good. And it just looked very uncomfortable. And that was a problem. That was a big, big problem for Denver, that they just looked uncomfortable for the entire third and fourth quarter. Denver scored 37 total points in the second half, 14 in the third quarter. It was a travesty of an offensive performance. It was also a tremendous defensive performance by the Timberwolves. You got to give them credit. They got themselves back into this game by playing hellacious defense. But I can't help but think that kind of like in game 6, Denver fed into what they were doing. They took open threes, Denver did, and was unable to hit them. There were so many moments where the Nuggets just need one of the threes to go down, one of them. And for an entire 6-minute stretch, they got it from absolutely nobody. Not Jamal, not Nikola, not any of the other starters, certainly not any of the bench guys. And that is how you lose a game 7. The offense dries up. I thought Jamal was good enough for them to win tonight. I think Nikola, he had 34, 19, and 7. Like, he was probably good enough for them to win tonight. But when the rest of the team combines to score 21 points, and that was on 17, 24, 28 shots, 21 points on 28 shots, it's going to be hard. The Timberwolves were defined by their role players' ability to really step up in that moment. Anthony Edwards was horrible. Not horrible. Like, he had some good playmaking moments, and he was great on defense at various points. But he was 6 of 24. What saved the game for the Timberwolves was Karl-Anthony Towns in the first half, Rudy Gobert somehow going 7 of 9 from the free throw line, and then hitting that turnaround fall away from 20 feet out over Joker, because of course he did. And then Jaden McDaniels hitting 7 of 10 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3, 6 of 7 from the line, 23 points on 10 shots for Jaden McDaniels. That is a margin. That's a tough margin to beat. And then Mike Conley hit some clutch threes himself. You got to tip your cap to Mike Conley. He had this moment against the Nuggets in the bubble 4 years ago where he missed the most important shot of his career, perhaps. And he paid it back. Paid it back and hit some clutch buckets. Hit one right at the buzzer in the left corner. Had one where he got Jamal up in the air and then hit a 3. Was just so good. And that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. Like, between McDaniels and Conley, 2 guys that you're not necessarily counting upon for a bunch of offense. The T-Wolves, 6 of 9 from 3. Michael Porter, 1 of 6. KCP, 1 of 4. Christian Brown, 0 of 1. Outside of Jokic and Murray, who both shot bad themselves. Like, I'm not saying that they're like indiscriminate from this, but 2 of 11 from Denver's role players. It's not good enough either. And that's how you lose. Michael Malone was pissed. Michael Malone was very frustrated. Jamal Murray was frustrated. Nikola Jokic, he was frustrated, but he kind of showed it in his own way. It wasn't necessarily this like massive show of emotion because that's not who Joker is. Aaron Gordon was frustrated in the locker room. He said that they had to be better against or like going forward, going into next season. Christian Brown was obviously upset. Michael Porter apologized to the team. According to, I think he said he apologized to the team in his post-game interview. I wasn't around for that. Murray was at the podium. And yeah, we'll talk about Porter on the other side, I guess. Like, he's one that you're gonna have to discuss. And we're gonna talk about it. What a toughie. What a toughie for Denver. When we come back, we're gonna talk about the series. We're gonna talk about how Denver ultimately lost this series. And then in the third segment, we'll talk about what comes next on Pickaxe and Roll. But first, I want to tell you about number 38. Unfortunately, now that the Nuggets and the Avalanche are both eliminated for over the weekend, they're not going to be doing any more Nuggets or Avalanche watch parties, but I still want you to go over there. Go over to number 38. Take advantage of great opportunities for food there. They've got a great patio area, an outdoor like lawn area with a big stage that has a massive TV. Lots of great outdoor seating, lots of awesome food choices, beverage choices. You get like so many different beers on tap. got some great things. Make sure to go check out number 38 and everything that they do up in Rhino. Awesome place to go hang out. Go check it out. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate the love and support this season, folks. I've been pretty open about how I don't know what the future holds for me. So always nice to see the love in the comments, in seeing people like and share the podcast out. That's always great. I'm glad to know that my work has made some modicum of difference, and hopefully it continues to do so. I do not want to go. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the offseason coverage holds, at least for the next few weeks. Let's talk now about the series. Just going to throw this up on the screen and then not talk about it. Let's talk about the series and what went wrong. Denver, and Michael Malone noted this, and he's noted this over the course of several pressers, that this was the very first time that the Nuggets were not going to be defined by how well they were going to defend. They were going to be defined by how well they could score. And they did not score well enough. I could pull up the numbers. Actually, let me try to pull up the numbers here real quick. The Nuggets did not score well enough on this series, and they clearly had problems just trying to figure out how to handle a tremendous defense that the Minnesota Timberwolves are. I mean, they're the number one defense for a reason. They were tremendous all season, and they have so many different kind of variables that work directly against the Nuggets. It's a really tough place for Denver to be. The Nuggets as a team had a 106.6 offensive rating in the series. That is by far the lowest of every team in the conference semifinals. And if I open it up to the entire first round, there are some teams that struggled worse, but they're the 8-seeded New Orleans Pelicans, the 8-seeded Miami Heat, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Orlando Magic that had the bloodbath against each other. And then that was it. So Denver, in the postseason, like including the Lakers series, has a 109.5 offensive rating, which is tied for 10th with the LA Clippers. And the LA Clippers struggled to score a lot during that series against the Dallas Mavericks. The Suns, as Dr. Van Nostrand notes, the Suns had a 109.3 offensive rating against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Nuggets had a 106.6. Now, to be clear, the Suns had a 123.2 defensive rating, while the Nuggets against the Timberwolves had a 111.8 defensive rating. Like, Denver was still in the series. They were there, but they did not score enough. And when you don't score enough, there are a couple ways you could go about it that you could figure it out. The most important is just to look at your stars and see how they played. Nikola Jokic, I think, was good enough in this series as an offensive player. I think he had some not great games. I think he had some tremendous games. Overall, with the matchups that he had, dealing with the defense of Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid man on, and then Rudy Gobert as the roamer behind, along with the broken up game of the pick and roll with Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Anthony Edwards, all those guys, just getting them in, like disrupting what Denver likes to do. Within that, Nikola Jokic, I think, still played good enough for Denver to win the series. Like, I don't know if he was the best player. I think he was overall the best player in this series. Anthony Edwards was very close, though, and it could go to Ant. Like, I don't want to say one way or the other. The problem started with Jamal. Jamal in the first 6 games of the series was not good enough. Straight up. Like, he had a good moment in game 3. He was solid in game 4. He was okay to subpar in game 5 and was horrible in games 2 and 6, and then really bad in game 1. Now he made up for it in a big way in game 7, in my opinion. He gave Denver as great of a position as they could possibly have in game 7 tonight. 24 points in the first half, 35 on the game. I thought that he played really well when the moment called for it. The problem was that he was not there enough, like soon enough. And whether it was the calf strain, whether it was the disruptive defense, whatever it was, I think you got to point to him as the second half of the two-man game and point out that he just was not good enough in this moment. Now, given how good the Timberwolves are on the perimeter, I wasn't expecting him to be dynamic. I wasn't expecting him to be great. I was expecting him to be good, though, and he wasn't good. And that's the margin that Denver needed. They did not need him to be bubble Jamal. They did not need him to be last year's version in the playoffs Jamal. They just needed him to be a solid starting point guard. And he probably did not do well enough with that, especially in the first 6 games of the series. Again, game 7 made up for some of it, but he was part of the opportunity that, like, Denver let go. He let go of the rope too. And the other one is Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter had a horrible series, both ends of the floor. Game 1, he had 20 points. Game 3, he had 20 points. In the other 5 games of the series, he was in the single digits. And most of that was not based off of shot type. It was not based off of, like, shot diet. He had enough shots in all but, I think, game 4, maybe game 5. It was one of the two, where he went like 2 of 4. But in the other ones, he was just a subpar scorer and did not play well enough for the Nuggets in this moment. Now, Porter gets credit for helping Denver get through the Lakers series because Jamal wasn't great in that series either, and Porter was the second best player, flat out. He was the second best player for Denver in that series and was very, very good. And he deserves some credit for that moment. But this is the difference between, and so I've heard this analogy before. I don't remember who said it. I think it was the GOAT podcast with Ben Golliver and Andrew Sharp. There's a modicum of difference between, like, you know how there's 82 game players and 16 game players. Within the 16 player breakdown, within the 16 game breakdown, there are players that are great in the first round of the playoffs. There are players that are great in the second round of the playoffs. And then there are players that are great in the conference finals and the NBA finals. And I think that Porter is still trying to figure out how to navigate the best of the best. Against the Miami Heat last year in the NBA finals, he was disrupted. Against the Minnesota Timberwolves this year, he was disrupted. He hasn't been perfect. It doesn't mean that he can't be better. He's still a relatively young guy. He's still figuring things out. And, like, for as long as he has been in the league, he's drafted in 2018. Because of the couple of years that he lost, he hasn't been on the floor as often as some of the other guys in the highest pressure moments. And I think that hurt him. I think there were times where Denver probably could have closed with Christian Brown in this game. Honestly, I think Michael Malone made a call that he was going to close with the starters. He was going to go with the bread and butter with plan A for this team. When in reality, he probably could have closed with Christian Brown, and I'm sure it wouldn't have made much of a difference. But the fact that Michael Porter, who should be a difference maker, wasn't making a bunch of difference, That's a problem. Denver's they've got some things to figure out with that. And then Aaron Gordon, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, they make up the other two members of the starting five. And the key factor here for Denver is that their starting five just got crushed during the entire series. I don't know what the exact plus minus was. I know that Zach Lowe shared the stat that they were minus 50 in 110 minutes after 6 games. I'm sure that went down in this game as well. So they're probably closer to minus 60 now in 130 plus minutes. And that's unfortunate because that is how the Nuggets were supposed to be the best version of themselves. They were supposed to be, and Matt has it here, minus 60 on the dot, minus 60 in 130 some odd minutes, I'm sure. Frankly, that's a disgusting total. Like, the Timberwolves are a team that is designed to take down Denver and designed to bother their starters. And yet Denver could not be that bothered if they wanted to win this series. They had to be able to rise above it. And it looked like they had in the first half of this game, which is the unfortunate aspect of it. The entire Nuggets group was in the double-digit positives, I think, or at least close to it. And they collapsed. Denver needs more juice in that starting group. There are moments where they can't necessarily go to Aaron Gordon. They can't necessarily go to KCP. And then there are definitely moments where they couldn't really go to Michael Porter. And when you and Michael Malone focused on this in the postgame presser, when you put so much pressure on Jokic and Murray to be the guys, yes, they are paid to do that. Yes, Jokic, like, that's understandable with Joker. Murray hasn't made an all-star game. We treat him like he's made an all-star. I treat him like he's made an all-star game because I know how good he is. And he carries himself and plays with that level in the playoffs, knowing that he's going to deliver in those moments. And frankly, he played well enough in Game 7 that Denver could get it done. They did not get enough of an impact from the other three guys. I thought Aaron Gordon was pretty brutal. We've got a visitor over here if you saw that on the screen. I thought that KCP, he had some moments. He had some good defensive moments. He was probably the best defender in the starting group, to be clear. Drew an offensive foul from Rudy Gobert, I think, in the third quarter. And Gordon was up and down in these playoffs. He wasn't bad by any, like, overall. Like, in Game 4, he won Denver that game, like, with his margin. He was amazing in Game 4. And then he also had moments working off of what Joker was doing in Games 3 and 5 that really helped. I just think that in Game 7, he probably didn't have enough of an impact, frankly. Karl-Anthony Towns got what he needed to get done, although most of that was on switches, I will say there. But Gordon was he had the lowest plus minus on the team tonight in his 42 minutes, had 0 defensive rebounds, didn't get to the free throw line at all. And there's a lot of things you can point out with his line, but he's an impact guy. Like, he's a guy that is going to give you impact. He's not necessarily a guy that's always going to give you numbers. But at this point, Denver needed other guys that could just put up points. And they didn't go to Gordon for that. They didn't really go to KCP for that. They went to Michael Porter for that. He didn't deliver. And finally, the bench. The bench in this one, kind of coming back down to earth in a little ways. I'm not going to put the blame of the game on the bench, especially when you look at the plus minuses and you're like, okay, Justin Holiday plus 10 in his 9 minutes. Reggie Jackson, net neutral in his 5 minutes. He also had a block, although he had a horrible turnover at one point that led to a run out for the Wolves. And then Christian Brown, Christian Brown's defense on Anthony Edwards tonight, especially in the first half, was tremendous. He was so good. And it's too bad that that's going to kind of get lost in all of this because there was a very, very important moment during this game where Anthony Edwards started the second quarter and Christian Brown came on the floor at the second quarter and just locked them down for those 3 minutes that he was out there and gave Denver the edge that they needed. And so I'm happy with where Christian's at. He's going to need to get better. He's going to need to become more dynamic with the ball going forward. But I really do think that like he's a guy that you can count on. He's a gamer. He's going to be there. And there just weren't enough guys on the bench that Denver could count on. Like Justin Holiday did what he was supposed to do throughout this series. He was very important. Reggie Jackson had some good moments. Christian Brown, I think, was awesome defensively. And he also switched, did a nice job against karl-Anthony Towns, although Towns did get some fouls on him, did score over him a couple times. But I really do think that Christian Brown, like there's a possibility that he's the starting shooting guard next year. Like I know that might be alarming to some, most notably to Matt in the comments. But I do think that there is a fairly significant possibility that Christian Brown's the starting two. And that could be tough. Like he's going to have to improve even more. Like cuz he's not there yet. He's going to need to be a better shooter. But Denver's going to need that defense and they're going to have to figure some things out. So, look, when we come back, I guess I've buried the lead a little bit. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's next. Denver lost this series. Congratulations to Minnesota. They absolutely earned it. They absolutely deserved it. And I'm very curious to see what happens for them going forward. I would favor them over the Dallas Mavericks, although Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, hell, PJ, Ray Allen, Washington, like that group, like they might be able to score against Minnesota in ways that Denver did not. So we'll find out. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Let's chat about what comes next. This is always one of those tough moments because this came a little bit sooner than I think a lot of Nuggets fans hoped for. And obviously the heartbreak is still fresh, as the title says above. The Nuggets have some things to figure out. They are going to be in a tough spot. And they, at this point, are pretty well locked into their team, except for a couple of specific guys. KCP has a player option, is the opportunity to become a free agent. I think that he'll talk with Denver. I think that Denver would obviously love to have KCP back. But there's the question of money. There's the question of how much KCP gets offered by other teams if they want him to be their starting shooting guard. I don't know what Denver would pay in order to keep him around. I think they'd probably give him a small raise, maybe like because he's making about $15 million. Maybe they'd pay him about $18 million per year, but probably not much more than that. So if a team gives him Bruce Brown money, $20 million, $21 million, $22 million, that's going to be tough for Denver to match. And because part of it is because they just don't have the flexibility with the rest of their roster. Jokic makes supermax money. Murray will be on the last year of his rookie max. Michael Porter's on a rookie max. Gordon's on a veteran extension. Like everybody's making money, and they should. Like those guys are, except for maybe Porter, those guys are paid equitably for what they do. And now it's on Denver to figure out how much they're willing to pay KCP versus they've got these young guys in the pipeline, like a Christian Brown, like a Peyton Watson, like a Julian Strother. They've got to figure out Like, are those guys capable of replacing him? Probably not. Can you get somebody else that is a veteran contributor that's a little bit cheaper? Denver doesn't necessarily have the viability to do that unless they do a sign and trade for KCP. That's not necessarily viable. So I'm curious to see what happens with KCP. That's the most important factor for Denver this offseason because they might try thinking about some other things. But when you think about where Denver went wrong and what they can actually do to change that, like Joker's sticking around. Jamal is sticking around. I know that some folks would love to trade Jamal. I would hesitate on that because one, he's on an expiring contract. Obviously, if he went to somewhere and agreed to a max extension somewhere or whatever extension, then that team would have him around for obviously a fair amount. But can Denver get equitable value if they trade Jamal? Like, what is equitable value? Is it De'Aaron Fox? Is it Darius Garland? No. Like, is it, I don't know, Donovan Mitchell? Probably too rich. Like, Denver's in a really interesting spot with Jamal because teams know how good he can be in the playoffs, but he also just had a horrible playoffs in general. And he's also never been an all-star. And teams aren't going to want to trade their all-stars for Jamal because they might see it as a downgrade in the regular season and maybe an upgrade in the playoffs. So I don't think that that's really viable. I don't think that that's a thing that Denver can change, nor should they want to change. Like, you want to keep around peanut butter and jelly, Joker and Jamal. Like, those guys are not going anywhere. Jamal wants to be around, I think. And Denver wants him too. Like, he's given his lifeblood to the city. He's given his lifeblood to the organization. He understands and riffs off of Joker in a big way. And he picks up Joker in some ways. Like, he hit 2 big game winners against the LA Lakers. He had 35 points to 9. Like, he has had moments. The fact is he's got to be better. And I know Matt and I are probably going to talk about this next week. Jamal's got to be an all-star next year. He's got to play like it because he didn't play like it this year. He played like a really good player this year. He didn't play like an all-star. I think it's about time for him to make that leap. And if he doesn't, then he might just be who he is, which is really good. And maybe not great. And maybe that's fine. Maybe Denver can get by with that. But if you accept that Murray is merely really good, Denver's probably got to try to find an all-star, a second all-star, to Jokic. Can that be Porter? I don't know. Porter showed a lot of weaknesses in this one. Maybe he comes back and is a better player next year. But I kind of think that Porter is going to be who he is, which is a solid starter, like a really, really solid starter. Somebody who can give you an advantage, but not necessarily one that's dynamic, off the dribble, and whatnot. Gordon, he is like he had a down year this year during the regular season. He was a borderline all-star the year before. I think the West has gotten better ever since then. Maybe he can get back to that, but between those three, Murray, Porter, and Gordon, Denver needs to get one of those guys to be an all-star. And if they can't, then that's where you probably need to find some other option. Because let's say Denver re-signs KCP. Let's say they just bring it back. Let's say all that they do this offseason is they draft another first-round pick. They replace, let's say, Reggie Jackson with a different backup point guard. And let's say they try to trade Zeke Naji for a different backup center. Is that good enough? Can Denver just run it back and feel like they have an advantage if they come up against the Minnesota Timberwolves again? Probably not. Like, you probably need something. that's a little bit more oomph in order to get past Minnesota. Now, maybe a backup point guard is really all that they need. Maybe somebody that could play next to Jamal Murray would be really helpful. I don't know. I think these are questions that we're going to answer. We're going to have to answer going forward. And the Nuggets are going to have a lot to figure out for obvious reasons. I do think that Denver shouldn't overreact. And what I mean by that is people are going to talk about trading Porter. People are going to be very disappointed with how he has played. For one thing, Porter's value on the open market is not so good that you're going to get a great option. They're going to have to figure it out with their current group, because I don't think that if you trade Porter for like Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, does that make you a better team? No, not really. Like, I think those guys are fine. I think Porter gives you a little bit of an edge. And I'm curious to see how he responds. I sort of neglected to talk about the adversity that he's been dealing with behind the scenes. His family's gone through hell. He himself has been at the center of a lot of these different, not the center, but like in the middle of all of this stuff that has happened to his family. He's gone through tragedy. He's gone through a really painful last couple of months. And he handled it really well against the Lakers. Didn't handle it as well against the T-Wolves. I'm not going to say that that was an excuse. The T-Wolves kind of played him out of it. I'm just curious to see how he looks when he comes back. Like, is he going to be a better player? Because, like I said before, I don't think that he is. I don't think that he will be. I think he's going to be what he is. I don't think he has a good enough handle or a good enough feel for the game or enough athleticism to really become a different dynamic player. And so if he is what he is, then Denver's just got to figure out how to work around that. Can Peyton Watson grow into somebody that's a little bit more dynamic and a two-way option? Can Julian Strawther off the bench give Denver some added offense, some boost that they desperately needed? Are those guys good enough on the other ends of the floor with Peyton on the offensive end and Julian Strawther on the defensive end to really make a difference? Do Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson have roles next year? Probably not. Denver's got a lot to figure out. They've got a lot to navigate. I don't know what they're ultimately going to do. I don't know how they're going to handle it. But I do know that they're really close this year. And people should not forget that. They're a top 3 team in the league. Genuinely believe that the Celtics, the Nuggets, and the T-Wolves are all in the same tier. I don't think that the Celtics are in a tier of their own. I don't think that the T-Wolves were a much better team than the Nuggets. I think that they were a team that was in the same tier as the Nuggets that matched up really well against them specifically. I don't know whether that same matchup is going to help them against the Celtics. Maybe this is one of those round, like rock, paper, scissors things where Denver matches up well with the Celtics match up well with the T-Wolves, and the T-Wolves match up well with the Nuggets. I don't think that it should be an overreaction. Denver should try to get back KCP if they can. If they can't, things are going to get a little weird. But it's tough. This was a moment where Denver could have capitalized. They didn't ultimately do so. And it's disappointing. It's disappointing for a lot of people. But the good news for Nuggets fans, let's get to take a deep breath. The pressure was so high on the Nuggets and Nuggets fans this season. Now, release the pressure a little bit. It's really hard to repeat. The Nuggets, they have to find a way to refocus, recover, and be better. And I think they will be. I really do. Everybody, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online, number 38, things like that. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button on the way out. Would really appreciate all the love and support. I don't know what my plans are going to be going forward. I will let you know. The Nuggets are going to do some sort of exit interviews with maybe Calvin Booth and Michael Malone and maybe Josh Kroenke. Probably talk about that. But there's going to be a lot to talk about this offseason. A lot to go over. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate all the love and support. Hit that like button on the way out. We'll talk to you guys very soon.